Welcome to Caledonia Sleeps, your peaceful escape into the heart of Scotland. If these stories bring you comfort, a like and a subscribe means the world, and it helps more people find their way to the fireside. Drop a comment and let us know where in the world you're listening from tonight. And as you do, begin to settle in. Pull the covers a little closer. Let the room grow still around you. Outside it is May in the Scottish borders. The evenings are long here at this time of year. The light lingers in the sky long after the sun has gone, a pale gold that fades so slowly you can't quite catch the moment it becomes dark. The gorse is out on the hillsides, burning yellow against the green. The hawthorn is in full blossom, white flowers dense on every branch, and the scent of them drifting through the warm air in waves, sweet and strange, and a little unsettling in the way that hawthorn always is. There is something underneath that sweetness that is hard to put a name to, beautiful and not entirely safe. Above the town of Melrose, 3 hills rise from the valley floor. They are set close together, each one slightly different height, rounded and patient and very old, worn smooth by more time than it is comfortable to think about. You notice them immediately. They have that quality. The Romans built a fort at their foot and called it Trimontium, 3 mountains. Long before the Romans came, the people of the Iron Age built a great hill fort on the northern peak, large enough for 2,000 souls, and long after all of them were gone, the hills remained, and they remain tonight. The heather on their upper slopes, holding the last of the evening light, just a little longer than the valley below. They are called the Eildon Hills, and our story begins at their foot. A few miles along the valley, where the river called the Leaderwater runs down through the fields to meet the Tweed, there was a village called Eildon. It is called Earlston now, and in Eildon in the 13th century, in a tower house above the river, there lived a man named Thomas. Thomas was a laird, a local landowner, a man of standing in his community. He was almost certainly a poet. The name Rhymer fastened itself to him at some point, and it has never let go in 700 years. Though whether it was his actual family name, or a word his neighbours found for what he was, no one can say for certain. What we know is that he was a man who paid close attention to the world around him. He listened. He looked at things carefully, and he had grown up his whole life with those 3 hills on the horizon, visible from his tower, visible from his fields, visible on every walk he ever took. One afternoon in May, he left the village and walked up toward the lower slopes of the Eildons. He followed a path beside a small stream called Bogleburn, Goblin Brook in the old Scots tongue, and the name alone tells you what kind of country this was, what kind of eye the people who named it brought the world around them. Thomas came to a grassy slope called the Huntly Bank, warm in the afternoon sun, with a particular tree growing at its edge, a hawthorn in May blossom, white flowers on every branch, and the scent of them was thick and sweet and strange in the air above the grass. Thomas sat down. He looked out over the valley. The Tweed was a glimmer below. Melrose Abbey caught the light a few miles off. Somewhere in the gully beneath the bank, Bogle Burn ran cold and clear over its stones. He was comfortable. He was in a place he knew. And then he looked up. She came riding down by the Eildon tree. Her skirt was of the grass-green silk, her mantle of the velvet fine. At every lock of her horse's mane there hung 50 silver bells and 9, and they rang with the sound Thomas had never heard before. Not quite music, not quite wind, something between the two. The horse was milk white. She rode without hurry, without any awareness that she was being watched, moving through the afternoon the way certain things do, as though the ordinary world were simply a place she was passing through rather than one she belonged to. Thomas's heart was hammering. He could feel it in his throat, in his hands. He had not moved. He was not sure he could move. He had seen beautiful women before. He had never seen anything like this. It was not simply that she was beautiful. It was that everything around her, the hillside, the hawthorn, the afternoon light, seemed slightly less real than she was, as though she were the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly gone thin. He got to his feet, pulled off his cap, and went down on one knee. All hail to thee, mighty Queen of Heaven, for thy equal on this earth I never did see. She looked at him then, and her eyes were the colour of deep water, grey-green and very old, and not entirely human. Oh no, Thomas, she said. Her voice was soft, but it carried across the hillside as clearly as a bell. That name does not belong to me. I am but the Queen of fair Elfland, and I have come here to visit thee. Not the Queen of Heaven, something else, something older and stranger, and she had ridden to this particular hillside on this particular afternoon because Thomas was there, not by accident. She had come for him. She looked down at him from the white horse, and there was something in her expression that was not quite amusement, and not quite pity, and not quite tenderness, but held something of all three. Harp and carp, Thomas, she said, if ye dare to kiss my lips, sure of your body I will be. Thomas did not hesitate. Betide me weal, betide me woe, he said. That fate shall never frighten me. And he kissed her, there under the Eildon tree, in the warm May afternoon, with the hawthorn blossom above them, and the sound of the bogle burn below. A man making a choice that felt, in the moment, like the only possible choice. Because when something like her rides towards you, out of the afternoon, with silver bells on her horse's mane, the ordinary rules of caution seem to belong to a different, smaller world. He did not know yet what he had agreed to. She told him then he must go with her, 7 years in her service, through good or ill, she said, whatever might come. She took him up behind her on the milk-white horse, and whenever her bridle rang, the steed flew swifter than the wind. The valley fell away, the abbey fell away, the sound of the bogle burn fell away. The ordinary world of the borders, the farms and the river, and the tower above Eildon, where Thomas had woken that morning, fell away behind them like something at the bottom of a well, growing smaller and quieter until there was nothing left of it at all. They rode on and further on. The steed went swifter than the wind. The light changed around them, not the ordinary fading of an evening, but something more absolute, a departure from daylight altogether. Around them the landscape had become something else, wide and flat and dark, without the contours of any country Thomas had ever walked in. No trees, no hills, no sound of water. The world they were moving through was a place between places, neither here nor anywhere else, and it went on for longer than any crossing of ordinary ground should take. At last, the Queen told him to lie down and rest. She let him lay his head upon her knee on the dark grass of that in-between country, and then she said she would show him something. She pointed to 3 roads stretching out across the dark before them. The first road was narrow, she told him, thick with thorns and briars on every side. That was the path of righteousness, she said. Few ever walked it. The second road was broad and easy, running out across a wide flat plain. That, she told him, was the path of wickedness, though some called it the road to heaven. And the third, the bonny road, she called it, the beautiful road, that wound away around the curve of a green fern-covered hillside and disappeared into somewhere that was neither heaven nor hell nor anything Thomas had a name for. That was the road to fair Elfland, the road they were taking. 3 roads stretching out across the dark, one difficult and worthy and barely used, one easy and dangerous and very well worn, and the third, winding, green-edged, going somewhere else entirely. Before they rode on, she turned to him, and her voice was serious now, the softness gone out of it. "But Thomas," she said, "ye must hold your tongue, whatever ye may hear or see, for if ye speak one word in Elfland, you will never win back to your own country." He looked at her. He nodded. 7 years of silence. in a place full of voices. They took the third road. On the road, further on, they waded through rivers above the knee. They heard the roaring of the sea, somewhere close and invisible, waves crashing in the dark around them, though there was no shore in sight. And then the water at their feet changed colour. It was dark, dark night with no starlight, and they waded through red water to the knee. For all the blood that's shed on earth, the Queen told him, runs through the springs of that country, all of it, every wound, every loss, every act of violence across the whole of human history. The water table of the fairy realm carries all of it through its springs. Thomas waded through it in the dark, in silence, and he understood that wherever he was going, it was connected to everything that had ever happened in the world he'd left behind. Nothing that had been done in the upper world was lost down here. It was all still running somewhere. Eventually the dark lifted, not into sunlight, but into a different kind of light, sourceless and flat, neither day nor night, but something that had its own rules entirely. And before them was a garden, green trees, fruit hanging heavy on every branch, ripe and bright and extraordinarily beautiful in that strange flat light. Thomas was hungry. The journey had been long beyond measuring. He reached for the fruit. The Queen stopped him. That fruit, she said, would cost him more than hunger was worth. She had brought food from the world above instead, bread and wine, ordinary provisions, the food of his own country. He ate, he rested. She sat beside him in the garden that he could not touch, and the silence between them had the quality of something that had been going on for longer than this afternoon. Then she stood. They mounted the horse, and they rode on into the court of Elfland. The court of Elfland is not the glittering other world of later fantasy. It is a great hall, a high roof, firelight on stone walls, hounds on the floor, the sound of music from somewhere further in the building, long tables set for a feast, people, if that is the right word, moving through the hall with the purpose and ease of a community that has been here a long time and expects to be here much longer. It looked, in almost every particular, like the world Thomas had come from. A court, a hall, a gathering of people around a fire, the same shapes of a human evening, and yet something was wrong in a way that was difficult to locate. The laughter landed a beat too late. The firelight moved at the wrong pace. The faces of the people around the hall were familiar the way a reflection in moving water is familiar, accurate and not quite right. The Queen brought Thomas in and explained his silence. He had no speech, she said, not since she'd brought him from Middle-earth, and so Thomas moved through the court for 7 years, mute among all those voices, watching everything. He watched the court and its daily rhythms, the feasting, the music, the arguments and alliances, and small griefs of a community living alongside each other in a confined space. He watched the Queen. He watched the way time moved, or rather, the way it didn't. The same quality of light at all hours, the same temperature, the same sense of a day that was neither beginning nor ending, but simply continuing. He could not speak, so he looked. He could not ask, so he learned to see answers in the things around him without having to be told. 7 years of that, 7 years of silence and watching in a hall that ran on different rules than the one he'd grown up in. Time in the fairy realm has never moved the way it does in the world above. This is one of the most consistent things in the whole tradition, across Scotland, Ireland, Wales, through centuries of telling. A single night under a fairy hill can mean 100 years have passed outside. 7 years in a fairy court can feel like 7 weeks. Thomas did not know, as he sat in that hall and watched the fire and held his tongue, how much time was passing in the valley of the Leader Water. He had no way to know. The ordinary markers of days and seasons did not function down here. He was simply in it for as long as it lasted. What ended the 7 years was not Thomas's choice. There comes a tithe, a tribute, that the fairy realm owes periodically to somewhere darker still, a payment made in souls. And as the time for the next payment drew close, the Queen looked at Thomas and decided she would not let it be him. He was too fine a man, or she had grown fond of him in the way that beings outside human time can grow fond of temporary things that pass through them. She sent him out a day before the reckoning was due. She walked him back through the garden and the dark rivers and the country between countries, and she left him on the hillside above Melrose, by the Eildon tree in the May light. He was back. Before she went, she reached into the folds of her green skirt and held something out to him, an apple from the garden they had passed through on the way in, ripe and bright in the flat, sourceless light. "Take this for thy wages, true Thomas," she said. "It will give thee the tongue that can never lie." Thomas looked at the apple, then at her. "My tongue is my own," he said. "That is no goodly gift to give me. I could neither buy nor sell, at fair or tryst, wherever I might be." He knew exactly what she was offering. A tongue that cannot lie is not simply a gift of honesty, it is a removal of choice. He would not be able to say the careful, untrue things that smooths over a disagreement. He would not be able to tell a grieving person that their loss will not last forever, when he could see that it would. He would not be able to negotiate, or flatter, or soften a blow, or hold his tongue on a truth that nobody in the room wanted to hear. The careful, untrue thing that smooths an argument, the small kindness dressed as comfort, all of it gone. From this moment forward, his mouth would say what was true, always, whether he was ready for it or not. She gave him the apple. He stood under the hawthorn on Huntly Bank, and the Queen rode away and was gone, and Thomas was left there in the ordinary May afternoon, with the valley below him, and the apple in his hand, and a tongue that no longer entirely belonged to him. He went home to Ercildoune, and the word spread, the way it always does in small places, that something had happened to Thomas, that he had been away, that he had come back different. People came to ask him things. He could not stop it. That was the thing. The truth simply came when it was asked for, or sometimes when it wasn't, pressing against the inside of his mouth until his tongue gave it shape and sent it out into the world. Thomas tried to dissuade people from consulting him. He didn't want to be this, but all his remonstrances were disregarded whenever the discourse turned on the future. Thomas gained the credit of a prophet, whether he would or not, for he could say nothing but what was sure to come to pass. Think about what the ordinary days were like. A neighbour asks what he thinks of the harvest this year, and Thomas opens his mouth, and what comes out is not reassurance. A man at the market asks whether the weather will hold for his journey, and Thomas tells him the truth about what is coming, and the man's face changes. A woman asking about her son away at war, and Thomas knows, before she finishes asking, that she should not have asked. He would have given almost anything some days to be able to say, I don't know, but the gift was not returnable, so he lived with it in his tower above the Leader Water. And people came from further and further away as the years passed and his reputation grew, and the answers kept coming out of his mouth, whether he wanted them to or not. The prophecy he is most remembered for concerns Alexander III, King of Scotland. It was the year of 1286. Thomas was at Dunbar Castle, a guest of the Earl of March, when the Earl asked him what the following day's weather would bring. Thomas told him that on the morrow before noon should blow the greatest wind that ever was heard before in Scotland. The next morning the sky was clear. The Earl's household looked at each other. By midday, nothing had happened. Thomas said nothing. Then the rider arrived from Fife. Alexander III was dead. The king had been riding home from Edinburgh in the dark, along a cliff-top path above the sea near Kinghorn, and his horse had gone over the edge. They found him on the beach the following morning. He was 44 years old. He left no direct heir. The wind Thomas had meant was not the weather. It was the thing that comes after a king dies, leaving nothing behind him. The long, howling instability, the years of claim and counterclaim, and invasion and war that follows when a crown has no clear head to rest on. Scotland would feel that wind for 30 years. The story of Thomas and the Earl of March that night at Dunbar Castle appears in multiple medieval sources. People did not forget it. It became the proof of Thomas, the example cited whenever his name came up and someone new needed convincing. And there was more. The years after Alexander's death were exactly what Thomas's wind had promised, long and brutal. Scotland pulled apart by rival claims and English ambition. Into those desperate years came Robert Bruce, fighting for a kingdom that seemed to be slipping away entirely, and people said Thomas had seen him coming, had seen the crown finding its way to Bruce after everything had seemed lost, had seen the field at Bannockburn in 1314, where Bruce held against the English army and Scotland kept its independence against all expectations. People whispered his name before the battle. Afterward, they said he had been right. The pattern held for centuries. Each great turning point in Scottish history arrived with a Thomas prophecy attached to it, or acquired one shortly afterward. The disaster at Flodden in 1513, when James IV led an army south, and 10,000 Scots died in a single afternoon, the king among them, the flower of the Borders nobility, gone in the space of a few hours on an English hillside. People said Thomas had seen it, the union of the crowns in 1603, the fall of Mary Queen of Scots, each one, his name on all of them. The honest answer, and the scholars have been honest about this, is that from the 14th century onward, it became common practice to attach new prophecies to Thomas's name, to give them weight. If you wanted people to believe a prediction, you said it came from true Thomas, because true Thomas could not lie, so anything bearing his name carried a guarantee that other predictions couldn't. Politicians used it, soldiers used it, pamphleteers printed his supposed words in chapbooks and passed them from hand to hand. Even in 1745, during the Jacobite Rising, people in the border countries were pulling out old Thomas prophecies to see what he had said about their moment. A man dead for 4.5 centuries, still being consulted, still being feared. The years passed in Ercildown. Thomas grew old in his tower. He had long since stopped trying to refuse the questions people brought him. He answered them. He tended his land. He watched the Eildon Hills from his window. He listened to the Leader water in the evenings. He lived the life of a border laird, with all the ordinary weight of it, the disputes and the harvests, and the visitors and the long winters. And underneath all of it, always, the tongue that would not lie, pressing against his teeth from the inside, like a stone he had swallowed and could not pass. Then one evening, Thomas was at dinner in his tower. He had guests. The Earl of March was among them, the same family who had been with him on the night of Alexander's prophecy. The fire was bright, the wine was good. Whatever weight Thomas carried every day, he had set it down for a few hours. He was, from all accounts, in good spirits. Then someone came running in from outside. A commotion in the village street. "Come and see," they said. "Come and see what is out there." Thomas went to the door of the tower. Coming through the village, moving unhurriedly through the street among the houses and the evening light, were two deer, a hart and a hind, a male and a female, both of them white as new snow, their coats catching the last of the day. They were moving through the middle of Eildon, the way wild deer do not move through villages, without fear, without urgency, as though the street were simply another kind of forest path, and they had walked it many times before, heads up, moving steadily, coming toward the tower. The guests crowded behind Thomas in the doorway, watching. Thomas watched too. His face, people said afterwards, was not surprised. He turned back to the room and said, "My sand is run, my thread is spun. Those animals are messengers for me." He did not say it with grief. He did not say it with fear. He said it the way a man states a fact he has known for a long time was coming, and is now simply here. He went out into the street. The white hart and the white hind turned when they saw him. They moved back the way they had come, toward the edge of the village and the darkness of the forest beyond it. Thomas followed them. His guests watched from the doorway of his tower, not moving, not calling after him, because what do you call into the dark after something like that? He walked into the forest. The trees closed around him. Thomas the rhymer was never seen again. Not dead, the tradition insists. The people of Eildon did not build him a cairn. They did not hold a funeral. He had gone back to Elfland, as he had gone before, and the door had closed behind him, the way a door closes when someone has passed through it with intention. The belief that persisted in the borders for centuries afterwards, that persists in some form still, is that Thomas will return, not to any particular generation, not in any crisis already named, but eventually. The fairy realm returned him once. It will return him again when Scotland needs what he carries. And beneath the Eildon Hills, in the hollow places below those three peaks, the same hills Thomas looked at every day of his life, he is said to wait. Along with Arthur and his knights, all of them simply elsewhere, all of them simply on the other side of a door that most people walk past without seeing. What I love about the Thomas story is that you can still go to these places. The landscape he walked through is still there. The hills he looked at every day of his life are still there. You can stand in the same ground and look at the same view and feel, if the light is right and the hawthorn is in flower, something of what he must have felt. Rymer's Tower still stands in Eildon, on the southern edge of the village. The walls are 10 feet high now, roofless and thick with ivy, the stonework worn soft by 7 centuries of border weather. It is not a dramatic ruin, it is a quiet one, the kind of place that asks you to stand still for a moment rather than take a photograph and move on. And if you stand there on a clear day and look southwest over the rooftops, the Eildon Hills are right there on the horizon. The same 3 shapes, they have always been. On the road between Melrose and St. Boswell's, there is a large mossy boulder at the roadside, the Rymer's Stone, sometimes called the Eildon Tree Stone. It marks the traditional spot of the hawthorn where Thomas met the Queen. The Eildons rise directly behind it. You could drive past without noticing it, and many people do, but some stop. They get out of the car and lay their hands on the moss. Some leave flowers, some leave coins. The same instinct that leaves coins on Robert Kirk's gravestone in Aberfoyle. The feeling that something should be left, even when you're not quite sure why. From the stone you can follow the path up through the lower slopes of the Eildons, past Bogle Burn, running cold and quick in its gully, brown water over pale stones, the banks bright with wild garlic in May, the white star flowers open, the sharp green scent of them rising through the heavier sweetness of the hawthorn above. The path climbs through gorse and heather. The Tweed Valley opens out below you as you rise, and eventually you reach the upper slopes, where the 3 peaks stand against the sky, and you can see for miles in every direction across the borders. The same view Thomas would have had, the same hills, the same wide sky over the same river valley. There is a hawthorn tree on the lower slopes, old and gnarled, growing alone in the rough grass. Nobody knows whether it has a connection to the Eildon tree of the ballad. Nobody can know that, but people stop at it in May, when it is covered in white blossom, and they stand there for a moment in the scent of it, sweet and a little strange, beautiful and not entirely safe, just as it always was. Let the fire settle now. Let the room go quiet around you. Outside, the May evening is long and pale over the borders. The hawthorn is still in flower. The Eildon Hills stand against the darkening sky, three patient shapes holding what they hold. Thomas left Eildon one evening and walked into the forest after two white deer and never came back. He left behind a ruined tower, a name, and 700 years of stories. He left behind a mossy stone at the foot of the Eildons, where people still stop and place their hands, not entirely sure why, but feeling that something is owed. He never wanted the gift, remember? He pushed back the moment she offered it. His tongue was his own, he said. He knew exactly what it would cost him, but the apple was pressed into his hand anyway. And from that moment, he carried the truth around with him every day, like something he could never quite set down. What I keep coming back to when I think about Thomas is not the prophecies or the court of Elfland or the queen with her silver bells. It's the ordinary days, the mornings he woke up in Eildon and looked out at the Leader water and knew that the truth was still there in his mouth, waiting, and that there was nothing to be done about it, but go about the day and say what had to be said. That is not an easy way to live, and yet Scotland kept his name for 7 centuries because of it, because a tongue that cannot lie is one of the rarest things in the world. And when people find one, they do not easily let it go. The tower is still there, the stone is still there, the hills are still there, and in whatever way the old traditions are right about the things they have always insisted on, in whatever sense a hill can hold a man, and a door can stand open for 700 years. Thomas is still there too, keeping the silence he was taught in Elfland, waiting under the hill with his tongue that cannot lie until the moment comes to use it. The hills are not saying when that will be. Rest now. Let the old stories settle around you, the way the dusk settles over the borders at the end of a long May day, slowly and completely and without any urgency at all. The Leader water is running in the dark. The hawthorn on the lower slopes of the Eildons is white with blossom in the warm night air, sweet and a little strange, just as it always was. If tonight's story has stayed with you, if you find yourself thinking about the hawthorn or the 3 roads, or the man who followed 2 white deer into the forest and did not come back, please do leave a like and a subscribe. It helps these stories reach more people, and there are so many more still to tell. I would love to know you are here. Good night from the fireside. Good night from Scotland. Good night.